Imagine working yourself to death, only to wake up in a world where immortals soar through the skies, ancient sects battle for power, and a single pill can change destiny forever. This is the story of Xiao-Ye, a 15-year-old orphan who died from hunger, only to be reborn with the soul of a modern office worker. Unlike every other hero, Xiao-Ye doesn't dream of becoming the strongest cultivator. He doesn't want revenge. He doesn't want fame. He doesn't even want to save the world. He just wants a quiet life, sleeping late, making alchemy pills, earning enough money to live comfortably, and avoiding trouble. But fate has other plans. On the very first day of his new life, a mysterious heavenly daily sign-in system awakens. Every sunrise brings legendary treasures, ancient cultivation techniques, rare spiritual flames, divine alchemy inheritances. The stronger Xiao-Ye tries to stay hidden, the more powerful he becomes. Follow his hilarious journey through the Green Cloud Sect, where every peaceful day somehow turns into another unbelievable miracle. Welcome to I just wanted a quiet alchemy life, but my daily sign-in system is too overpowered. Title: I just wanted a quiet alchemy life, but my daily sign-in system is too overpowered. Chapter 1: The Coffin, the Cauldron, and the Slacker's Wake. The smell of burnt firewood and damp earth was the first thing that registered in Xiao-Ye's consciousness. It wasn't the sterile, chemical stench of the hospital ward where he had spent his final, agonizing moments on Earth. There was no rhythmic, irritating beep of a heart monitor, only the distant, rhythmic thwack of an axe chopping wood and the raucous caw of crows circling overhead. Xiao-Ye tried to blink, but his eyelids felt as heavy as iron gates. Am I dead, he thought, a numb sort of panic prickling at the edges of his mind. The truck, I remember the headlights, I remember the screech of tires. If I'm dead, why does my chest hurt like I've been trampled by a wild boar? With a desperate, ragged gasp, he forced his eyes open. The view wasn't heaven. It was a ceiling made of rotting thatch, crisscrossed with thick, dust-laden cobwebs that trembled in a chilly draft. He was lying on a hard wooden board covered by a threadbare blanket that smelled intensely of old straw and unwashed feet. He moved his hands, lifting them into his line of sight. These were not his hands. His hands had been calloused from years of typing at an office desk, pale and slender. These hands were rough, dark from sun exposure, small and distinctly youthful. What in the? His voice came out as a cracked, prepubescent croak. Suddenly, a violent spike of pain shot through his temples. It wasn't physical trauma, but a flood of alien memories forcibly stitching themselves into his brain. The influx was so sudden that he clamped his hands over his ears, groaning as the puzzle pieces of a completely different life fell into place. World of cultivation, the Azure Continent, the Great Xia Dynasty, peripheral borders, Green Cloud Mountain Village, Xiao-Ye, age 15, an orphan. The boy he now inhabited had died just hours prior from sheer exhaustion and a severe fever brought on by malnutrition. He had spent 3 consecutive days digging through the dangerous crags of the nearby mountains, hoping to find a single scrap of spiritual grass to sell to the passing merchants of the Green Cloud Sect. Instead, he had caught a chill, collapsed on his dirt floor, and quietly passed away, leaving a clean slate for an exhausted soul from Earth to slip into the vacant vessel. Xiao-Ye sat up slowly, rubbing his aching temples. He looked around the room. It was a miserable hut. A broken clay pot sat in the corner, a single wooden stool stood on 3 legs, and a rickety window shutter banged rhythmically against the mud-brick wall. Transmigration, Xiao-Ye whispered, a wry, bitter smile touching his lips. Of all the cliched ways to spend a Friday night, I didn't even get a chance to delete my browser history. He sighed, letting his head drop back against the hard wooden headboard. Back on Earth, he had worked himself to death, literally collapsing at his desk after a 72-hour software sprint. He had no grand ambitions left. He didn't want to conquer kingdoms, he didn't want to rule the world, and he certainly didn't want to fight to the death with arrogant young masters over hidden treasures. If I'm in a cultivation world, that means people fly on swords and live for thousands of years, he muttered to himself, analyzing his situation with the cold pragmatism of a former data analyst. But it also means the mortality rate is higher than a medieval plague. If you're a genius, people try to assassinate you. If you're trash, people step on you like an insect. He crossed his legs, attempting to recall if the original host had any latent talent. The memories returned a depressing answer: medium-grade wood-fire spirit root. In the grand hierarchy of the cultivation world, a medium-grade spirit root was the absolute definition of mediocre. It wasn't complete trash. He could gather chi if he worked hard enough, but he would never be a chosen disciple, a sect leader, or an immortal sovereign. At best, he would become a low-level guard or a minor clerk in a mortal city, aging and dying in 80 years anyway. Perfect, Xiao-Ye said, a genuine look of relief washing over his face. Medium talent means nobody expects anything from me. I can just find a quiet trade, earn a few spirit stones, buy a nice house with a garden, and sleep 12 hours a day. No fighting. No drama. Right as the words left his mouth, a sound resonated directly within his mind. It wasn't a human voice, nor was it a spiritual transmission. It was a crisp, mechanical, chillingly familiar chime. Ding. Target soul stabilization complete. Detecting host compatibility. Host identity confirmed. Xiao-Ye transmigrator. Binding successful. Welcome to the heavenly sign-in system. Xiao-Ye froze. His eyes widened as a translucent, glowing blue interface materialized in the air right before him. It didn't cast light onto the room's dirty walls. It existed solely within his visual cortex. A system, Xiao-Ye muttered, his heart hammering against his ribs. Wait, no, keep it down. If some high-level cultivator passes by and senses this, I'm a dead man. System notice: the heavenly sign-in system operates on a higher dimensional plane. Immortal emperors, heavenly Taos, and primordial gods cannot detect its existence or its rewards. The host may remain calm. Xiao-Ye let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Okay, good, so what do you do? The heavenly sign-in system allows the host to sign in once per day. Signing in at ordinary locations yields standard cultivation resources, materials, or basic knowledge. Signing in at special locations, sect altars, ancient ruins, historic battlefields, divine springs, yields premium, rare, or legendary rewards. Current location: the dilapidated mud hut of Green Cloud Village. Class Ordinary F rank. Xiao-Ye rubbed his chin. So it's a daily gacha game, but without the microtransactions, and I don't have to risk my life fighting demonic beasts in dark caves to get loot. Correct, the host only needs to exist and click sign in. A slow, brilliant grin spread across Xiao-Ye's face. This is the ultimate slacker tool. System, you and I are going to get along just fine. Ding, detecting that this is the host's first day of activation. A newbie gift pack has been compiled. Would the host like to open it? Open it, Xiao-Ye said without hesitation. Let's see what the baseline is. The blue interface flared with a gentle, golden light. A series of icons popped up in rapid succession, accompanied by descriptions that made Xiao-Ye's analytical mind spin. Ding, newbie gift pack opened successfully. You have received the following rewards. 1. Beginner Alchemy Scripture, comprehensive guide to mortal pill-making and theory. 2. 100 Herb Recognition Technique, instant master-level knowledge of 100,000 mortal herbs. 3. Low-grade Spirit Cauldron, an iron-bronze cauldron with stable heat distribution. 4. Pure Heart Fire Seed, a mild, easy-to-control spiritual flame perfect for beginners. 5. 3 Foundation Strengthening Pills, Grade 1 Purity, 95%. 6. Spirit Root Cleansing Liquid, purifies impurities within medium-grade spirit roots. Before Xiao-Ye could even process the list, a massive wave of information crashed into his brain for the second time that morning. But unlike the chaotic, painful memories of the boy's death, this information was perfectly ordered, crystal clear, and beautifully cataloged. Thousands of illustrations of plants, roots, berries, and fungi flashed through his mind. He instantly knew which leaves were poisonous, which roots could heal a broken bone, and exactly how many seconds a crimson sun flower needed to bake under a low flame before its spiritual essence liquefied. Simultaneously, a warm, soothing sensation bloomed in his chest. A small, flickering speck of pale blue light settled near his heart, the pure heart fire seed. It didn't burn him. Instead, it sent a comfortable warmth through his limbs, completely erasing the lingering chills of the fever that had killed his predecessor. Alchemy, Xiao-Ye murmured, looking down at his hands. His medium-grade spirit root was a combination of wood and fire. In the cultivation world, this specific combination was mandatory for becoming an alchemist. Wood allowed a cultivator to feel the life force and essence of plants, while fire allowed them to refine those plants into concentrated pills. The original boy wanted to become a powerful martial cultivator to protect the village, Xiao-Ye thought, shaking his head gently. But fighting on the front lines is a fool's errand. Alchemists, they stay in the back. They sit in heavily fortified rooms, protected by guards, making pills that everyone wants. Nobody wants to kill the guy who makes their healing medicine. If I become an alchemist, I can live a comfortable, wealthy, and perfectly safe life. Decision made, Xiao-Ye looked at the remaining physical items listed in his system inventory. With a mental thought, he selected the spirit root cleansing liquid. A small green jade vial materialized out of thin air, dropping gently into his palm. The glass was cool to the touch, and through the translucent surface he could see a thick, glowing silver liquid swirling like a miniature galaxy. According to the common knowledge of this world, spirit roots are fixed at birth, Xiao-Ye soliloquized, pulling the wax stopper from the vial. A sharp, refreshing scent of pine and mint instantly filled the cramped hut. If people found out a single drop of liquid could change a person's latent talent, the grandest sects in the world would wage war over it. The system really doesn't play around. He tilted his head back and drank the liquid in one gulp. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Xiao-Ye blinked, wondering if the potion was a dud. Then the world exploded into pain. It felt as though liquid nitrogen had been poured directly into his veins, immediately followed by molten lava. Xiao-Ye collapsed off the wooden bed onto the dirt floor, his body curling into a tight fetal position. He bit his own arm to keep from screaming out loud. He didn't want the neighbors or Granny Liu from down the path to come running in. Deep within his torso, his spirit root, which previously looked like a withered, dual-colored branch covered in moss, was being violently scrubbed. The dark, muddy impurities that blocked his spiritual meridians were dissolved by the silver liquid forced out through his skin. The agony lasted for 10 grueling minutes before it suddenly receded, leaving behind an overwhelming sensation of lightness and clarity. Xiao-Ye lay on the dirt floor, panting heavily. He ran a hand over his face and realized he was covered in a thick, foul-smelling gray sludge. It was the physical and spiritual waste that had been clogging his body for 15 years. He smells like a sewage backup," Xiao-Ye groaned, pushing himself up. But as he stood, he noticed a massive difference. His vision was sharper. The distant sound of the woodcutter's axe sounded closer, and he could actually feel the faint currents of spiritual chi floating in the air around him. He opened his system's status panel to check the results. Host Xiao, Cultivation, Mortal No Realm, Spirit Root, High Medium Woodfire Spirit Root, Purified, Alchemy Rank, Apprentice Alchemist. It didn't turn me into a legendary primordial genius, Xiao-Ye observed, a satisfied nod escaping him. But it upgraded me from a low-tier slacker to a high-tier slacker. My cultivation speed will be double what it was, and my control over herbs will be significantly smoother. This is more than enough for a peaceful life. He walked over to the rickety window and pushed it open, letting the cool mountain air clear the stench from the hut. Outside, the sun was rising over the misty peaks of the Green Cloud Mountain range. The mountains looked majestic, covered in ancient pines and veiled in a perpetual spiritual fog. According to the town gossips, the Green Cloud Sect, a minor bottom-tier cultivation sect, was holding its outer disciple recruitment trial in 3 days at the foot of the mountain. The original Xiao-Ye had planned to attend, hoping to become a sword servant just to get enough food to eat. The Green Cloud Sect is small, poor, and handles mostly local affairs, Xiao-Ye mused, leaning against the window frame. A large, powerful sect would have strict discipline, intense internal rivalries, and elders who inspect your body with divine sense every 5 minutes. A small sect is messy, relaxed, and easy to hide in. If I join their Alchemy Hall as an apprentice, I can use their free ingredients, sign in daily at their facilities, and live a cozy life under the radar. He looked down at his filthy clothes and sticky skin. Before he could plan his journey to the sect, he needed to wash up. Taking an old wooden bucket from the corner, he slipped out of the hut and headed toward the small stream that ran through the outskirts of the village. The morning air was crisp, and the dew on the grass wet his bare feet. As he walked down the dirt path, he passed a small, neat cottage surrounded by drying racks filled with wild roots and leaves. An elderly woman with silver hair tied back in a neat bun was sorting through a basket of bitter ginseng. This was Granny Liu, the village herbalist. "Xiao-Ye," Granny Liu called out, her cloudy eyes squinting as she saw him approach. She paused, dropping a root back into the basket. "Child, is that you? You look different today, and what in the heavens is that dreadful smell?" Xiao-Ye stopped, coughing into his hand awkwardly. Good morning, Granny Liu. I had a terrible fever last night, and I think my body just sweated out all the sickness. I'm on my way to the river to wash my clothes." Granny Liu walked over to the fence, looking at him intently. Her gaze was sharper than any ordinary villager's should be, though Xiao-Ye, lacking cultivation experience, didn't notice the faint glimmer of spiritual light in her pupils. "Sweated out the sickness, you say?" she murmured, reaching out to tap his wrist. Her fingers were warm and calloused. As soon as she touched his pulse, her eyebrows shot up in subtle surprise. The boy's meridians, which had been clogged and frail yesterday, were now wide, clean, and humming with latent vitality. "You've had a stroke of luck, boy," Granny Liu said quietly, a mysterious smile playing on her wrinkled lips. "The heavens sometimes look after those who have nothing left. Tell me, are you still planning to attend the Green Cloud Sect trial in 3 days? "I am," Xiao-Ye replied honestly. "But I don't want to be a swordsman or a guard. I want to see if I can enter their Alchemy Hall and become an apprentice. It seems like a steadier trade." Granny Liu let out a soft, crackling laugh. "An alchemist. It's a path that burns through money and resources like dry wood, child. But it suits a boy who hates getting his hands bloody. Wait here." She turned and hobbled back into her cottage, returning a minute later with an old, yellowed leather pouch. She pressed it into Xiao-Ye's hands. "These are some basic notes on herb drying and sorting that I kept from my younger years," Granny Liu said, her voice dropping to a soft whisper. "The Green Cloud Sect's entry test for alchemists always involves identifying 10 wild plants. Study this pouch. It might save you from failing on the first day." Xiao-Ye felt a genuine flash of gratitude. He knew from the original host's memories that Granny Liu had always been kind, occasionally feeding him when he had nothing. "Thank you, Granny," Xiao-Ye said, bowing slightly. "I'll make sure to study it thoroughly." Ding, detecting interaction with a significant historical legacy character. Granny Liu, former maiden of the ancient Silverpill clan. Special location unlocked within a 10-meter radius, Granny Liu's herb garden. Would the host like to perform today's sign-in here instead of the hut? Xiao-Ye's heart skipped a beat. A legacy character? This old grandmother in a tiny village has an ancient background. He kept his face completely expressionless, ensuring Granny Liu didn't notice his internal shock. "Sign in right here," he commanded the system mentally. Ding, congratulations. You have signed in at Granny Liu's herb garden, class, Hidden Legacy C rank. You have received the 7-syllable flame compression technique, grade 3 spiritual art. Reward description, a lost method of compressing spiritual flames to increase their refining temperature without requiring higher chi consumption. Perfect for alchemists with low cultivation realms. Xiao-Ye's soul practically did a joyful flip. A grade 3 spiritual art was something only inner elders of minor sects had access to, and it was specifically designed to help low-level cultivators refine high-level pills. With his medium spirit root, his main weakness would have been running out of stamina during long refining sessions. This technique perfectly solved that issue. "Is something wrong, child?" Granny Liu asked, noticing him staring blankly at the pouch. "No, nothing at all," Xiao-Ye said quickly, offering a bright, innocent smile. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am to have your help. I'll go wash up now so I don't ruin your nice garden with this smell." "Go on then, you smelly brat," she chuckled, waving him off. Xiao-Ye hurried down to the river, his mind buzzing with excitement. He stripped off his filthy clothes, threw himself into the cool, rushing water, and scrubbed his skin until it was pink and clean. The gray sludge washed away down the river, leaving behind skin that looked healthier, clearer, and slightly fairer than before. As he sat on a rock, waiting for his damp clothes to dry in the morning sun, he opened his system interface again and pulled out the 3 foundation strengthening pills from his newbie pack. The pills appeared in his hand, 3 perfectly round, pearl-white spheres that emitted a faint, milky fragrance. According to his newly acquired beginner alchemy scripture, a standard foundation strengthening pill had a purity of around 30% to 40%. Anything above 70% was considered a top-quality pill, rarely seen outside royal capitals. These pills from the system were listed at 95% purity. At 95% purity, there is almost zero pill toxin, Xiao-Ye murmured. If I swallow this, I can step into the first layer of the body-tempering realm without any side effects. He popped the first pill into his mouth. It dissolved instantly on his tongue, turning into a warm, gentle stream of energy that flowed straight into his muscles and bones. There was no pain this time, only a deep, satisfying sensation of strength filling his body. His posture straightened, his muscles toned slightly beneath his skin, and a layer of physical power settled into his frame. Ding! Cultivation breakthrough detected. Body tempering layer 1, cultivation breakthrough detected. Body tempering layer 2. A single pill had pushed him through 2 layers of the mortal cultivation path in a matter of minutes, all without a single drop of sweat or a single hour of tedious meditation. Xiao-Ye looked up at the sky, a peaceful, contented smile on his face. 3 days until the sect recruitment, he said to himself, laying back on the smooth river rock. I'll just spend the next 3 days sleeping, eating Granny Liu's dried fruit and signing in daily. By the time I get to the Green Cloud Sect, I'll be the most overqualified apprentice they've ever seen, and they won't suspect a single thing. He closed his eyes, letting the warm sun lull him into a comfortable morning nap. His journey to becoming the greatest, laziest alchemist in the cosmos had officially begun. Chapter 2, The Fire of the Hearth and the Soup That Shook the Soul. The river water had long dried from Xiao-Ye's skin by the time he wandered back to his small mud hut, but the newfound lightness in his limbs remained. Passing from an ordinary mortal with a failing constitution directly into the second layer of the body-tempering realm was like stepping out of a suit of lead armor. Every step felt effortlessly springy. His breath came in slow, measured rhythms that naturally pulled microscopic fragments of environmental chi into his freshly scrubbed meridians. But as he crossed the threshold of his creaking wooden door, a very mortal reality brought him crashing back down to earth. His stomach let out a thunderous, cavernous growl. Right, Xiao-Ye muttered, rubbing his flat belly. Cleaning out 15 years of spiritual filth and jumping 2 cultivation layers apparently burns a massive amount of caloric energy. If I don't eat something soon, I'm going to be the first cultivator to starve to death right after a breakthrough. He surveyed the interior of his hut with a critical eye. The meager inheritance of the original host left much to be desired. In a small, chipped clay jar near the 3-legged stool, he found about 2 handfuls of coarse, low-grade brown millet. Hanging from a rusty nail on the wall was a withered bundle of wild mountain green scallions, and a small piece of dried, salt-cured pork fat, no larger than a child's fist, covered in a thin layer of gray dust. It was a meal meant for a peasant scraping by on the absolute fringes of survival. Well, it's not exactly a 5-star buffet, Xiao-Ye soliloquized, pulling down the salt pork and brushing off the dust. But a former software engineer knows how to survive on instant noodles and stale coffee. This is basically the cultivation world's equivalent. Let's make some standard village pottage. He set up his cooking area, which consisted of 3 flat river stones arranged in a triangle over a shallow pit in the dirt floor. He placed his only cooking utensil, a battered, dented iron pot with a loose wire handle, atop the stones and emptied his remaining fresh well water into it. He chopped the wild scallions with a dull kitchen knife, tossed them in, and sliced the salt pork into thin, translucent strips to render whatever fat he could. Now came the tricky part, lighting the fire. The original Xiao-Ye would have spent 10 minutes furiously striking a piece of flint against a rusted iron bar, hoping to catch a stray spark on a nest of dried moss. But the current Xiao-Ye possessed something far more volatile and infinitely more elegant. He closed his eyes and looked inward, focusing his consciousness on the small, pale blue spark floating quietly near his heart. The system called it the pure heart fire seed, though in his thoughts, his mind kept slipping and calling it the azure flame out of sheer aesthetic appreciation for its deep, cerulean hue. System warning: the pure heart fire seed is a grade 1 spiritual flame meant for pill refinement. While mild in comparison to heavenly flames or earthly tribulation fires, Using it in a mortal environment requires precise control to prevent structural incineration. I know, Xiao-Ye thought back to the blue interface. Just a tiny touch. Think of it like a pilot light on a gas stove. He extended his right hand, pointing his index and middle fingers toward the pile of dry twigs beneath his iron pot. He channeled a microscopic thread of the warmth from his chest down his arm, through his fingertips, and whispered under his breath, utilizing the structural theory behind the 7-syllable flame compression technique he had just acquired from signing in at Granny Liu's garden. Compress. A tiny, pinprick-sized bead of brilliant azure light detached from his finger and drifted lazily onto the dry wood. The moment the blue bead touched the kindling, there was no smoke, no sputtering, and no gradual buildup. The dry twigs didn't just catch fire. They instantly dissolved into a steady, perfectly uniform, intensely hot blue flame that hovered directly beneath the iron pot. The heat was completely contained. Xiao-Ye could hold his hand barely 3 inches away from the side of the fire and feel only a pleasant, ambient warmth. But the bottom of the iron pot turned a vibrant cherry red within seconds. The well water inside the pot didn't merely simmer. It violently erupted into a rolling boil almost instantly. Whoa, too hot! Xiao-Ye panicked, pulling his hand back. He quickly reined in his spiritual intent, dampening the output of the fire seed. The intense cerulean glare softened into a gentle, sleepy sky-blue flicker, settling down into a perfectly regulated low simmer. Xiao-Ye wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead, staring at the pot in fascination. Unbelievable. The thermal efficiency of spiritual energy leaves fossil fuels completely in the dust. If I had this back on Earth, my utility bills would have been 0. As the wild scallions and salt pork boiled within the high-temperature water, something extraordinary began to happen. The pure heart fire seed wasn't just heating the water. Its spiritual properties were actively interacting with the organic matter inside the pot. The dull, stringy green scallions, which were nothing more than common weeds grown in poor soil, suddenly began to uncurl. Under the influence of the compressed spiritual heat, the latent, microscopic traces of natural qi hidden within the plant's cellular structure were forcibly unlocked. The faded green color transformed into a rich, vibrant jade hue that practically glowed. The fat from the dried pork dissolved completely into the broth, turning the water from a clear liquid into a rich, milky white elixir that simmered with tiny, sparkling silver bubbles. An aroma began to drift up from the pot, escaping through the gaps in the thatch roof. It wasn't the smell of cheap peasant soup. It was a scent so profoundly rich, savory, and intoxicatingly fresh that it felt like a physical weight in the air. It smelled of deep mountain forests after a spring rain, roasted marrow, and a sweetness that made the salivary glands ache with immediate desire. "What is this?" Xiao-Ye muttered, his eyes wide as he looked into the dented pot. He picked up a chipped wooden spoon and took a small, cautious sip of the broth. The moment the liquid hit his tongue, his eyes practically shot out of his head. It was an absolute flavor bomb. The sharpness of the scallions had been perfectly neutralized into a crisp, refreshing sweetness, while the salt pork provided a deep, savory, velvety richness that coated his mouth. But more than the taste, the soup felt alive. As it slid down his throat, a vibrant wave of gentle, pure energy bloomed in his stomach, instantly radiating outward into his limbs. Ding! Host has successfully utilized a Grade 1 spiritual flame and a Grade 3 compression technique to execute spiritual extraction on standard ingredients. Item created, unintentional spirit nourishing pottage. Grade, submortal, exceeds standard human culinary limits, possesses 15% of the efficacy of a low-grade qi gathering pill. Side effects, extreme deliciousness, temporary accelerated digestion, minor skin flushing. 15% of a cultivation pill? Xiao-Ye stared at the wooden spoon in disbelief. From a handful of weeds and a scrap of old pig fat, if the professional chefs in the mortal cities found out about this, they'd throw themselves into the river out of shame. He didn't care about the system's commentary for long. Driven by the primal urge of a starving teenager, Xiao-Ye fell upon the pot like a localized hurricane. He didn't even bother pouring the soup into a bowl. He used the wooden spoon to shovel the jade-green scallions and the rich, milky broth into his mouth, completely ignoring the heat. Every swallow felt like a warm blanket wrapping around his internal organs. The minor aches left over from his rapid breakthrough into the second layer of body tempering were completely smoothed out, replaced by a deep, luxurious sense of physical satisfaction. Within 5 minutes, the entire pot was scraped completely clean, leaving not a single drop of broth behind. Xiao-Ye dropped the spoon back into the pot, leaning against the mud wall of his hut with a heavy, blissful sigh. His face was bright red, his skin radiating a gentle, healthy heat as his body rapidly processed the sudden influx of pure nutrients. "Ah, this is life," he whispered, closing his eyes. "Who cares about reaching the immortal realm? Give me 3 meals a day like this, a comfortable bed and no deadlines, and I'll happily stay a villager forever." Meanwhile, less than 50 paces away, inside her neat cottage surrounded by drying racks, Granny Liu stopped mid-motion. Her wrinkled hand, which held a bundle of dried bitter ginseng, trembled slightly. Her head snapped toward the window, her nostrils flaring as she caught a stray current of the wind blowing from the direction of Xiao-Ye's hut. The scent was incredibly faint to an ordinary person, almost entirely masked by the smell of wood smoke and morning dew. But to someone with her specific history, the scent was as loud as a thunderclap. It was the aroma of perfectly extracted plant essence. There was no trace of charcoal bitterness, no scorching of the delicate spiritual veins within the leaves, and most importantly, there was a faint, distinct undertone of pure heart fire, a refined, specialized flame used exclusively by recognized alchemists. This smell, Granny Liu's cloudy eyes suddenly cleared, revealing a pair of sharp, brilliant pupils that burned with a deep, ancient intelligence. "No, it's impossible. That brat Xiao-Ye has lived in this village since he was a toddler. I checked his skeleton myself a year ago. A medium-grade wood-fire root, completely average, with no inheritance or hidden master." She dropped the ginseng back into the basket and stepped out onto her porch, her gaze locked onto the thin wisp of smoke rising from Xiao-Ye's thatch roof. To the untrained eye, it was just standard cooking smoke. But to Granny Liu, who had spent the first 80 years of her life in the grand pavilions of the ancient, now-ruined Silverpill clan, she could see the faint, rhythmic pulses in the smoke. The smoke rose in 7 distinct, subtle rings before dispersing into the mountain air. The 7-syllable flame compression method. Granny Liu's breath caught in her throat, her old heart skipping a beat. That is a lost signature technique of my Silverpill clan's outer elders. How could a peasant boy from the peripheral borders of the great Xia dynasty know how to control his fire with such structure? A flurry of thoughts raced through her mind. Had a wandering expert from her clan's ancient rivals found the boy and taken him as a secret disciple? Or worse, was Xiao-Ye an old monster from an immortal sect who had undergone samsara rebirth, masking his presence in this backwater village until his soul awakened? If he is a reborn cultivator, his sudden shift in constitution this morning makes perfect sense, she muttered, her fingers tightening around her wooden walking stick. Yesterday he was dying of a mortal chill. This morning, his meridians are as clean as a newborn jade infant, and he's cooking common weeds with refined spiritual flame control. Granny Liu stood on her porch for a long time, the wind rustling her silver hair. A complex mixture of caution, curiosity, and a faint, long-buried ember of hope flared within her chest. The Silverpill clan had been wiped out 2 centuries ago by the corrupt forces of the Crimson Cauldron Alliance, leaving her as one of the few surviving keepers of their legacy, hiding in anonymity to escape the purge. If this boy truly possessed an affinity for her clan's lost arts, regardless of how he acquired it, it was an anomaly she could not ignore. "I need to test him," she decided quietly. "If he is an old monster playing dumb, I must tread carefully. If he is simply a boy who stumbled into a miraculous inheritance, then perhaps the heavens haven't completely forgotten my clan after all." Back in the hut, completely oblivious to the fact that his afternoon lunch had just triggered a minor existential crisis in his neighbor, Xiao-Ye was currently sitting cross-legged on his bed, experimenting with his system panel. "System," he said in his mind, "show me the details of the beginner alchemy scripture I received earlier." Ding, Beginner Alchemy Scripture, a comprehensive guide compiled from the fundamental truths of the universe's pill-making Tao. It contains 3,600 basic pill structures, detailed methods for controlling cauldron air pressure, and instructions on how to use spiritual roots to sense the exact maturation point of medicinal ingredients. Xiao-Ye nodded thoughtfully. Back on Earth, when we compiled a program, if the code had even a single misplaced semicolon, the whole system would crash. Alchemy seems exactly the same. People think it's just throwing herbs into a pot and cooking them, but it's actually complex biomolecular engineering using spiritual energy as the catalyst. He reached into his system's storage space and withdrew the low-grade spirit cauldron. With a soft, metallic thud, a small, three-legged cauldron materialized on the dirt floor. It stood about 2 feet high, crafted from a heavy, dull green iron-bronze alloy. The exterior was etched with faint, simplistic runes depicting twisting vines and stylized flames. It wasn't flashy or majestic, but the moment it appeared, the air in the room felt sturdier. Xiao-Ye crawled off the bed and squatted next to it, tapping the metal side with his knuckle. Ting! The ring was deep, clear, and perfectly resonant. "Nice," Xiao-Ye said, a small grin appearing on his face. "This is my new workstation. No more office cubicles, no more dual-monitor setups, no more manager shouting about quarterly deliverables. Just me, a pot, and whatever the system drops into my lap every morning." He looked out the window. The sun was beginning to dip below the western peaks, casting long, golden shadows across the village. He had 2 full days left before the Green Cloud Sect recruitment trial began. "I shouldn't overdo it," he cautioned himself, leaning back against the cauldron. "If I show up to the trial at the 3rd or 4th layer of body tempering, the sect elders might think I'm a genius and try to force me into the martial arts division. I need to look just healthy enough to pass, but ordinary enough to be tossed into the herb gardens where nobody pays attention." He picked up the old leather pouch Granny Liu had given him earlier in the day. He untied the string and pulled out a stack of yellowed, brittle papers covered in fine, elegant handwriting. As he flipped through the pages, his 100-herb recognition technique instantly cross-referenced the handwritten notes with the master database in his mind. Scanning handwritten notes. Observation. The notes contain highly advanced, hidden structural formulas disguised as common drying techniques. The optimal ratio for drying bitter ginseng, listed here, reduces toxin retention by 12% compared to standard mortal methods. This is an elite-tier legacy technique from a heaven-grade alchemical faction. Xiao-Ye's eyes narrowed slightly as he read the system's analysis. He looked out the window toward Granny Liu's quiet cottage. "Well, well," he murmured, a soft laugh escaping him. "It looks like I'm not the only one in this village keeping secrets. The sweet old grandmother next door is a hidden boss." He closed the pouch, a comfortable sense of ease washing over him. In a world full of terrifying cultivators and world-ending cultivation wars, having a hidden master right next door, even one who didn't know he knew, was incredibly reassuring. 2 more days of signing in? Xiao-Ye stretched his arms over his head, yawning deeply as the post-soup drowsiness finally caught up with him. "Let's see what kind of ridiculous stuff the system gives me tomorrow." He climbed back onto his thin straw bed, curled up under his blanket, and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep, completely untroubled by the grand fate that was slowly weaving its threads around his quiet village life. Chapter 3: The Well, the Weed, and the Grandmother's Grudge. The second morning of Xiao-Ye's new life began not with the gentle rustle of wind through the thatch roof, but with a crisp, digital chime that bounced delightfully against the interior of his skull. Ding, it is now 00:00 of the second day. The daily sign-in function has been refreshed. Current location, Green Cloud Mountain Village. Warning, repeating a sign-in at a previously used F-rank location, the Mud Hut, will result in a 90% degradation of reward quality. The host is advised to find a new coordinate. Xiao-Ye blinked open his eyes, staring up at the familiar cobwebs. He rubbed his face, feeling the supple, smooth texture of his skin, a far cry from the cracked, dry hide of the previous morning. "A localized cooldown, huh? Smart. Otherwise, I'd just sit in this hut for 80 years and become an immortal emperor without ever putting on shoes." He kicked off his thin blanket and stretched. His joints popped like a string of small firecrackers. The 2 layers of body tempering he had achieved from the foundation strengthening pills the day prior had settled beautifully into his frame. He felt light, nimble, and absurdly alert. Slipping into his rough canvas tunic, which still smelled faintly of the river stones where it had dried, Xiao-Ye stepped out into the pre-dawn mist. The village was dead silent. A thick, milky fog rolled down from the craggy peaks of the Green Cloud Mountains, wrapping the dirt paths in a ghostly shroud. It was the perfect time for a slacker to do some light, unbothered exploration. He wandered down the western path, away from Granny Liu's cottage, actively looking for a landmark that felt historically heavy enough to trigger a decent system response. Near the edge of the village, where the cultivated plots gave way to the tangled briars of the wilderness, he found it. It was an old, abandoned stone well. The wooden windlass had long since rotted away, leaving only a moss-covered stone rim choked with thorny vines and dry leaves. The village elders said the well had gone dry 3 generations ago after a minor tremor shifted the underground springs, and it had been left to the elements ever since. An old, dead well at the edge of a wilderness, Xiao-Ye murmured, leaning over the rim. He couldn't see the bottom, only a deep, yawning blackness that smelled of damp earth and old stones. Perfect. Nobody comes here, and it's definitely a distinct location. System, sign me in right here. Ding, congratulations. You have signed in at the Forgotten Village Well class, Abandoned Historical E rank. You have received the Celestial Cowherder's Weed-Weighing Scale. Reward description. A seemingly ordinary pair of wooden hand scales once used by a legendary immortal bovine tender to weigh spiritual grass. It possesses no combat value and cannot store items. However, it can accurately measure the weight of any organic matter down to the exact weight of a single pollen grain, while revealing the percentage of moisture retained within the stalk. A faint shimmer of light materialized in the air, and a small object dropped into Xiao-Ye's waiting hands. He held it up to his face, his expression a mix of profound curiosity and mild disappointment. It was a remarkably simple tool. It consisted of a smooth, polished rod of dark cherry wood about 10 inches long, etched with tiny, microscopic white notches that were barely visible to the naked eye. Dangling from one end by a trio of coarse linen threads was a shallow, circular wooden dish no larger than a teacup saucer. A small, bronze counterweight hung from the rod by a loop of silk. A scale, Xiao-Ye chuckled dryly, balancing the cherrywood rod on his index finger. System, I'm trying to become an alchemy grandmaster, not a grocer in a mortal marketplace. What am I supposed to do with this? Weigh out portions of rice. System notice. Master-level alchemy requires absolute structural precision. A variance of even 1/1000th of a gram in a volatile ingredient like the dragon breath fruit can cause a cauldron explosion capable of leveling a mountain. The host should not look down on the tools of precision. All right, fair point, Xiao-Ye conceded, slipping the compact scale into the deep sleeve of his tunic. As a former data guy, I can appreciate a good tool for measurement. Though I doubt I'll be handling mountain-leveling ingredients anytime soon. He turned back toward the village as the first golden rays of the sun began to pierce through the heavy mountain fog. His stomach, predictable as an atomic clock, let out another sharp rumble. It was time to head home and see if he could scrounge up another pot of that incredible spiritual nourishing pottage from yesterday. However, as he neared his mud hut, he found his path blocked. Standing right in the middle of the dirt trail, with her hands resting heavily on her wooden walking stick, was Granny Liu. She was wearing a thick, dark blue apron over her robes, and her silver hair was tied back tighter than usual. Next to her on the ground sat a massive, overflowing wicker basket filled to the brim with a chaotic mess of green leaves, tangled roots, and dried stalks. "Morning, Granny," Xiao-Ye said, putting on his best innocent, dim-witted village youth smile. "Up early today, need some help moving that basket. It looks heavy for your back." Granny Liu didn't smile, her cloudy eyes fixed onto his face, scanning his features with an intensity that felt like a physical weight pressing against his forehead. She noticed the subtle change in his posture, the way his shoulders squared naturally, and the clear, bright luster in his eyes that only appeared when a human body was nourished by pure qi. "My back is fine, brat," Granny Liu said, her voice dry and raspy. "But my ears and my nose have been bothering me. Yesterday, I smelled something unusual coming from your chimney. And today, I find you wandering around the old well before the roosters have even cleared their throats." Xiao-Ye's heart gave a slight, cautious thud, but his face remained a mask of pure peasant innocence. "Oh, the smoke. I was just trying to cook up some old bacon fat with those wild scallions you showed me last year. I think I accidentally burned a bit of that pine sap that leaks through the roof logs. Smelled weird, right? I thought I poisoned myself for a second. Granny Liu's eyes narrowed into tiny slits. Pine sap, burned bacon fat. If she hadn't detected the pure, unblemished essence of the 7-syllable flame compression technique in that smoke, she might have actually believed the boy's idiotic excuse. He was playing dumb, and he was doing it with the terrifyingly natural skill of an old fox. Is that so? Granny Liu tapped her walking stick against the ground. Thud. Well, since you're so fond of wild scallions and herbs, and since you're planning to drag your lazy bones to the Green Cloud Sect trial tomorrow, it's time to see if you actually have brains, or if your skull is just filled with mud. She pointed her gnarled finger at the massive wicker basket at her feet. This is a basket of 100-leaf green grass and false jade mint that I harvested from the lower ridges yesterday, she stated coldly. The two plants look identical to the mortal eye when they're fresh, but the Green Cloud Sect's alchemy elders use them for completely different purposes. One is a cooling agent for low-grade spirit-soothing salves. The other is a mild toxic weed that causes uncontrollable skin rashes if mixed into a healing potion. She leaned forward, her silver hair catching the morning light. The entry test for the sect's Alchemy Hall requires you to sort a batch of herbs under a time limit. If you fail, they throw you into the iron mines as a laborer. So, Xiao-Ye, sort this basket for me. Put the 100-leaf green grass on the left sheet and the false jade mint on the right. You have until the sun clears the roof of your hut. Xiao-Ye looked down at the basket. To any ordinary 15-year-old, the basket looked like a giant pile of uniform green lawn clippings. The leaves were the exact same shape, the same shade of emerald, and grew in the same triple cluster formation. But the moment Xiao-Ye's eyes locked onto the pile, his 100-herb recognition technique, instantly supplemented by the absolute precision of his newly acquired weed-weighing scale, went to work. Target identification, mixed harvest of mortal-grade herbs. Plant A, 100-leaf green grass. Average stalk moisture, 74%. Specific gravity per standard leaf, 0.042 grams. Plant B, false jade mint. Average stalk moisture, 68% due to high internal fiber density. Specific gravity per standard leaf, 0.045 grams. Visual difference, 0. Weight and textural density difference, 7.1%. Xiao-Ye's mind instantly formulated a plan. He could easily sort this by touch alone using his high-medium wood spirit root to feel the fibers, but Granny Liu was watching him like a hawk. If he did it too fast or too perfectly by hand, she would know for certain that he was hiding a major cultivation inheritance. He needed a prop, something that made him look like a clever, pedantic eccentric rather than a hidden genius. Wow, Granny, that looks like a lot of work, Xiao-Ye said, scratching the back of his neck and sighing dramatically. But since you went to the trouble of bringing it over, I guess I'll try. Wait a second, I have just the thing for this. He reached into his deep sleeve and pulled out the small cherrywood scale he had gotten from the well just 10 minutes prior. Granny Liu frowned, her gaze landing on the small, simple tool. What is that toy? Oh, this? I found it in an old chest in my father's attic before he passed, Xiao-Ye lied smoothly, balancing the scale with an intentionally clumsy motion. It's a tiny scale. I noticed last summer that some weeds feel heavier than others when they're dry. I thought if I can't tell them apart by looking, I'll just weigh them. Granny Liu almost snorted out loud, weighing them with a wooden market scale. The density difference between fresh herbs of the same genus was so microscopic that even low-level chi-gathering cultivators couldn't consistently discern it without using their divine sense to probe the internal spiritual veins. For a boy with no formal training to think he could sort alchemy-grade plants using a balance scale was utterly laughable. Go ahead then, fool. Granny Liu crossed her arms, a cynical glint in her eye. Let's see your attic toy work. Xiao-Ye squatted down by the basket, spreading out 2 old linen sheets on the dirt. He reached into the pile, pulled out a cluster of 3 green leaves, and tossed them into the circular wooden dish of the scale. With a practiced, quick flick of his wrist, one that looked casual but was perfectly calculated, he slid the bronze counterweight along the cherrywood rod. The scale tipped instantly, the white notch lining up perfectly with his mental data for 100-leaf green grass. Left side, Xiao-Ye muttered, tossing the cluster onto the left sheet. He reached in again, pulled out another cluster, and placed it on the dish. The scale tipped slightly less, the counterweight settling one notch short due to the higher fiber density and lower moisture of the false jade mint. Right side, Xiao-Ye said, tossing it to the right. Plop way left. Plop way right. Plop way left. Xiao-Ye's hands began to move with a steady, rhythmic cadence. He didn't look at the leaves. His eyes were fixed solely on the tiny white notches of the scale. To Granny Liu, it looked like the boy was just playing a bizarre, repetitive game of merchant shop, moving the little weight back and forth with a vacant, slightly lazy expression on his face. But as the minutes ticked by, Granny Liu's cynical expression began to crack. She knew exactly how many clusters of each herb she had placed in that basket. She had deliberately mixed them in a specific ratio, 47 clusters of false jade mint and exactly 53 clusters of 100-leaf green grass, to test if the boy could actually sense the subtle toxic properties of the mint. Xiao-Ye's stack on the left was growing larger. The stack on the right was keeping pace. What shook Granny Liu to her very core wasn't just his speed, but his absolute accuracy. She watched him pull a cluster that had been slightly crushed at the bottom of the basket, a leaf that was torn and covered in dirt, making its visual identification completely impossible. Xiao-Ye didn't even hesitation. He tossed it onto the dish, checked the balance for half a second, and threw it firmly onto the right-hand sheet. It was a perfect specimen of false jade mint. This is impossible," Granny Liu whispered under her breath, her fingers tightening so hard around her wooden walking stick that the ancient would let out a faint creak. She wasn't sensing any spiritual energy from the boy. He wasn't using divine sense. His meridians were perfectly quiet, and the faint traces of chi in his body were stable and unmoving. He was genuinely, truly sorting them based entirely on the mechanical readout of that ridiculous, tiny wooden scale. What kind of magical treasure is that? She thought, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of her neck. A scale that can discern the structural density of fresh spiritual flora down to the absolute micrograin without requiring a single drop of spiritual energy to activate. Not even the grandest artifacts of the Crimson Cauldron, Alliance's high elders could perform such a feat. Within 20 minutes, Xiao-Ye tossed the final cluster of leaves onto the left sheet and stood up, rubbing his lower back with a loud, theatrical groan. "Phew. Done," Xiao-Ye proclaimed, wiping his dry brow. "Man, that's tedious work. Hey, Granny, take a look. Did I get any of them right, or did my dad's old scale trick me?" Granny Liu stepped forward, her legs feeling strangely heavy. She looked down at the two piles. Left side, exactly 53 clusters. Right side, exactly 47 clusters. The separation was absolute. There wasn't a single stray leaf out of place. The cooling herbs were perfectly isolated from the toxic weeds. If an alchemy apprentice in the Green Cloud Sect performed a sort this flawless, the sect master himself would immediately promote them to a core disciple and hand them a personal cauldron. She slowly looked up from the piles, her sharp pupils boring into Xiao-Ye's lazy, smiling face. She realized then that whether this boy was a reborn old monster or the luckiest fool under the heavens, his path in the world of alchemy was already set. A tool like that scale, combined with his unnatural composure, meant that the recruitment trial tomorrow wouldn't be a challenge for him. It would be a total farce. "You," Granny Liu opened her mouth, her voice trembling slightly before she forced her ancient, rigid composure back into place. She let out a long, slow breath, her shoulders sagging. "You didn't miss a single one, you troublesome brat." Xiao-Ye clapped his hands together, his grin widening. "Awesome! That means I won't get thrown into the iron mines tomorrow. Thanks for the practice, Granny. Your basket really helped me figure out how to balance this thing." Granny Liu shook her head, a complex, wry smile appearing on her face. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, dried blue berry, tossing it into his basket. "Take it," she said quietly, turning her back to him as she picked up her now-empty wicker basket. "That's a blue mist berry. If you put it in your tea tonight, it will help soothe your throat for tomorrow's journey. And Xiao-Ye." She paused at the edge of the path, looking over her shoulder with an expression that made him lock his muscles. "Keep that scale hidden in your sleeve when you're at the sect," she warned softly. "The world is full of greedy people who love to steal nice toys from foolish children." "Understood, Granny," Xiao-Ye said, his voice dropping its goofy tone for just a fraction of a second, acknowledging the genuine protection in her words. "I'll keep it safe." As the old woman hobbled back toward her cottage, Xiao-Ye looked down at the little cherrywood scale in his hand. He slipped it back into his sleeve with a newfound appreciation. "Well, look at that," he chuckled to himself, turning back toward his hut to finally make breakfast. "The system's junk turns out to be a cheat code for the mortal realm. Tomorrow is the sect trial. Let's see how quiet I can keep this ride." Chapter 4, The Muddy Path and the Master of Scams. The road leading from Green Cloud Village to the base of the Green Cloud Sect was less of a road and more of a glorified ditch filled with loose gravel and thick, yellow clay. Following a brief midnight drizzle, the path had transformed into a treacherous mire capable of swallowing a donkey cart up to its wooden axles. Xiao-Ye sat cross-legged in the back of a communal mortal carriage, which was essentially a large wooden flatbed pulled by two sluggish, heavy-hooved oxen. Around him huddled a dozen other youth from neighboring settlements, each clutching their meager belongings with white knuckles. Some were practicing their breathing exercises, trying desperately to trigger a breakthrough into the first layer of body tempering before the gates opened, while others were weeping softly out of sheer anxiety. Xiao-Ye, conversely, was sound asleep. He was leaning against a sack of feed, his straw hat tilted over his eyes, snoring softly in rhythm with the jolting of the cart. He had already achieved the second layer of body tempering and possessed a system that rendered stressful training entirely obsolete. As far as he was concerned, this journey was a paid vacation. Crack! With a violent lurch, the carriage ground to an abrupt halt. The sudden deceleration caused several of the nervous applicants to tumble forward into a tangle of limbs and baggage. Xiao-Ye's hat slipped, and he blinked open his eyes, letting out a heavy, lazy yawn. "What's the hold-up?" the driver, an old mortal man with a tobacco pipe, shouted into the mist ahead. "The path is blocked. We ain't moving until the crowd clears." Xiao-Ye stretched his arms over his head, adjusted his canvas tunic, and hopped down from the wooden flatbed into the shallow mud. Up ahead, where the mountain path narrowed between two steep stone cliffs, a massive bottleneck had formed. At least 40 or 50 young applicants, mostly wealthy town youths wearing clean silk robes, were gathered in a tight, clamoring circle. At the center of the crowd stood a remarkably plump young man who looked to be around 17 years old. He was wearing an absurdly ostentatious robe of bright gold silk that was a few sizes too tight, causing his rounded belly to protrude like a well-fed melon. His round, chubby face was flushed pink with excitement, and his small, bead-like eyes gleamed with the unmistakable light of an absolute opportunist. This was Fatty Chen, and right now he was standing on top of an empty wooden crate, holding a glittering, fist-sized rock high above his head. "Gather round, future immortals. Step right up and behold the opportunity of a lifetime," Fatty Chen shouted, his voice smooth, boisterous, and entirely devoid of shame. "Are you worried about your talent? Are you terrified that the sect elders will look at your spirit root and throw you into the outer kitchens? Fear no more. What I hold in my hand is an absolute treasure uncovered from a deep-sea mystic realm, the primordial immortal-grade core stone." Xiao-Ye walked to the edge of the crowd, crossing his arms and watching the spectacle with immense amusement. The rock in Fatty Chen's hand was certainly pretty. It was a jagged piece of crystalline quartz that had been heavily coated in some sort of glowing, phosphorescent blue powder. Inside the stone, a tiny, trapped firefly was violently buzzing around, creating the illusion that the rock was pulsating with a rhythmic, mysterious internal spiritual energy. "This stone," Fatty Chen continued, wiping a theatrical tear from his eye, "contains the condensed aura of an ancient ascended master. If you hold it in your palm during the talent inspection tomorrow, its profound spiritual fields will temporarily mask your true root, making even a low-grade trash root look like a high-grade heavenly talent to the sect testing stones. I was going to use it myself, but alas, my own talent is simply too high, and I cannot bear to see my fellow Taoists suffer the pain of rejection." The crowd of gullible, desperate mortal applicants let out a collective gasp. Is it true?" a frail-looking youth in a silk robe whispered, his eyes locked onto the glowing rock. "How much do you want for it?" "A drop of water in the ocean, my friend," Fatty Chen beamed, holding up 3 fingers. "Only 30 low-grade mortal spirit stones. Or if you don't have stones, I will accept 200 silver taels. A small price to pay to guarantee your entry into the immortal path. Xiao-Ye blinked, his analytical mind instantly running the numbers. 30 spirit stones. That's enough to buy a decent mortal house or a year's worth of solid food. This fat guy is a predator. Curious to see just how deep the scam went, Xiao-Ye subtly activated his 100-herb recognition technique and focused his vision on the glowing rock. While the technique was primarily designed for plants, its fundamental data compilation allowed him to analyze organic and inorganic compound structures. Target analysis, coarse mountain quartz. Surface coating, crushed luminous moss and sugar water used to create a sticky, glowing lacquer. Internal content, one dying mountain firefly estimated lifespan remaining, 3 hours. Spiritual energy value, absolute 0. Market value, 3 copper coins for the quartz. Xiao-Ye almost let out a snort. It was a textbook street hustle, executed with flawless theatrical timing. "I'll buy it," the frail youth shouted, reaching into his silk robes and pulling out a heavy pouch of silver coins. "I have 200 silver right here. Give it to me." "Wait, I'll give you 220 silver." Another arrogant-looking town youth pushed forward, waving a bank note. "My father is the magistrate of White River City. The stone belongs to me." Fatty Chen's small eyes lit up like lanterns. He looked like a cat that had successfully negotiated a contract for a fish monopoly. "Ah, an auction. The magistrate's son bids 220. Do I hear 250? Remember, your future immortality is at stake." Xiao-Ye sighed softly, shaking his head. He had no intention of being a hero or playing the righteous investigator. It violated his core philosophy of staying out of trouble. But the carriage path was completely blocked by this crowd, and if they didn't move soon, the sun would set before they reached the mountain gates. Slipping his hands into his canvas sleeves, Xiao-Ye stepped forward out of the mud and leaned against the wooden crate right below Fatty Chen. "Hey, brother," Xiao-Ye said, his voice casual, lazy, and pitched just loud enough to carry over the shouting of the bidders. "That's a nice stone, but I think your primordial master inside the rock is getting a bit tired. Its wings are slowing down." The sudden comment caused the frantic bidding to halt. The magistrate's son frowned, glaring at Xiao-Ye. "What are you talking about, peasant? What wings?" Fatty Chen's smile stiffened for a fraction of a second. He looked down at Xiao-Ye, his small eyes narrowing as he recognized the calm, unbothered expression of a person who couldn't be fooled. He quickly covered his blunder with a booming laugh. "Ha ha! This brother has a humorous soul, wings. The spiritual light of an ancient master does not have wings. It pulses with the rhythm of the Tao." "Sure, the Tao of fireflies," Xiao-Ye chuckled, tapping the wooden crate with his toe. "If anyone here has a basic fire-lighting talisman or even a hot cup of tea, just hold it near the bottom of the rock. The sugar water lacquer will melt right off, and the ascended master inside will probably fly away into the bushes to find some damp leaves." The crowd went dead silent. The magistrate's son stopped waving his bank note, his eyes shifting suspiciously from Xiao-Ye to the rock. "Wait, sugar water, fireflies." Fatty Chen's face turned from pink to an ashen, panicked white. He knew his scam had been completely dismantled by a single, lazy observation from a boy who looked like an ordinary village peasant. If the crowd turned on him, he wouldn't just lose the silver. He would be beaten into a purple pulp right here in the mud. "Ah, look at the time," Fatty Chen suddenly gasped, shoving the glowing stone into his golden robes and jumping down from the crate with surprising agility for a man of his stature. "The spiritual aura of the mountain is fluctuating. The core stone must be sealed immediately to prevent a spiritual explosion. The auction is postponed. Safe travels, everyone." Before the angry mob could even process his words, Fatty Chen sprinted past the horses, dove through a thicket of thorny bushes at the side of the path, and vanished down a steep ravine with the speed of a frightened wild boar. "Hey, get back here. It was a fake. Catch that fat bastard." The crowd of applicants erupted into chaos, several of them throwing down their baggage to give chase into the woods. With the bottleneck suddenly broken, the carriage drivers began whipping their oxen, eager to clear the muddy pass before another disturbance occurred. Xiao-Ye dusted off his canvas tunic, completely unbothered by the screaming behind him. He walked back to his communal cart, grabbed the wooden rim, and swung himself back onto the flatbed, pulling his straw hat back over his eyes. Well, he muttered to himself, settling into the soft grain sack as the cart began to roll forward again. That cleared the traffic. Now let's get back to sleeping. An hour later, the carriage pulled into a wide, stone-paved clearing at the absolute base of the Green Cloud Mountain. The massive mountain peaks loomed overhead like green titans, their upper halves completely swallowed by ancient, spiritual clouds. Thousands of youths from all over the province were already gathered in the plaza, creating a sea of nervous energy. Xiao-Ye hopped down from the cart, stretched his legs, and prepared to look for the signpost leading to the Alchemy Hall apprentice registration. He wanted to get his entry over with as quietly as possible. As he walked toward the outer perimeter of the plaza, away from the main crowd, a heavy, panting shadow suddenly materialized from behind a decorative stone pillar. "Hey, PSD, brother, over here." Xiao-Ye stopped, turning his head. Emerging from behind the pillar was Fatty Chen. His golden silk robes were now shredded, covered in burrs, twigs, and thick streaks of yellow mud. His face was scratched up, and he was violently catching his breath, but his small eyes were fixed on Xiao-Ye with a profound mixture of resentment and intense curiosity. "You," Fatty Chen wheezed, leaning against the stone pillar and pointing a chubby finger at Xiao-Ye's chest. "You completely ruined my quarterly revenue back there, man. 220 silver taels. Gone. Vanished into the wind because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about the firefly." Xiao-Ye didn't run, nor did he look alarmed. He simply offered a small, lazy smirk. "If I didn't say anything, the carriage road would have been blocked for another 2 hours. I was tired and I wanted to take a nap. Don't take it personally, business is business." Fatty Chen stared at him, his mouth falling open slightly. He had expected the boy to be frightened or perhaps righteous and angry. Instead, Xiao-Ye was completely detached, speaking with a cold, practical pragmatism that Fatty Chen usually only saw in veteran merchant tycoons. Slowly, the anger faded from Fatty Chen's face, replaced by a wide, crooked, entirely appreciative grin. He straightened his ruined robes, patted his round belly, and took a step forward, extending a muddy hand. "Business is business, huh? I like that," Fatty Chen chuckled, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "The name is Chen Fu, though my friends call me Fatty Chen. I can respect a man who tears down a scam just to get a good nap. Tell me, brother, how did you spot the firefly through 3 layers of dense, luminous lacquer? Not even the town guards, with their basic tracking talismans, could see through that." Xiao-Ye looked at the muddy hand, then back up at Fatty Chen's round face. His analytical mind quickly evaluated the situation. This fat guy was a shameless crook, a liar, and a master of public manipulation, which made him the absolute perfect shield for a slacker who wanted to hide his own talent. If Xiao-Ye made pills secretly, he would need someone greedy, loyal, and incredibly clever to sell them in the mortal markets without asking questions. "Xiao-Ye," he replied smoothly, reaching out to shake the muddy hand. "And as for how I saw it, let's just say my dad's old attic toys aren't the only things I know how to use." Fatty Chen's eyes gleamed with a sudden, intense financial interest. He felt a weird, intuitive inkling deep in his gut, the same feeling he got right before a massive market boom. This quiet, village youth was wrapped in an aura of complete calm that didn't belong in a backwater province. "Xiao-Ye, my friend," Fatty Chen put a heavy, golden-clad arm around Xiao-Ye's shoulder, completely ignoring the mud staining both of their tunics. "I have a feeling you and I are going to make an absolute mountain of spirit stones in this sect. What division are you signing up for?" "Alchemy Hall apprentice," Xiao-Ye said, walking toward the registration tables. "The back rooms, the quiet desks." "Perfect," Fatty Chen clapped his hands together, his laughter echoing across the stone clearing. "I'm signing up for the logistics and treasury procurement. You make the items, I handle the distribution, and we split the profits 60-40. What do you say?" 50-50, Xiao-Ye countered without missing a beat, not even looking back. "And you do all the talking." "Deal," Fatty Chen trotted after him, his round belly bouncing with pure joy. The slacker alchemist and the shameless merchant had officially formed their alliance, and the unsuspecting Green Cloud Sect had absolutely no idea what was about to walk through their gates. Chapter 5, The Smell of Iron and the Art of Sandbagging. The Alchemy Hall's examination pavilion was not the ethereal, cloud-swept sanctuary Xiao-Ye had envisioned. Instead, it resembled a cross between a medieval blacksmith's forge and a high-stakes university chemistry lab. The air inside the vast, stone-walled chamber was thick and suffocating, heavy with the sharp, acrid sting of sulfur, the metallic tang of heated bronze, and the bittersweet, smoky residue of thousands of previous failed experiments. Rows of massive, black iron tables stretched across the flagstone floor. Atop each table sat an identical set of basic tools: a shallow wooden tray containing 3 unidentified bundles of dried flora, a small brass mortar and pestle, and a standard, low-grade copper ore crucible meant to test an applicant's basic ignition capabilities. At the front of the pavilion, raised on a dais of polished slate, sat Elder Mo-Ching. The man looked as though he had been carved out of an old, knotty pine tree. His robes were a dull, ash-gray, completely unadorned by the shimmering silver embroidery worn by the sect's martial elders. His face was a map of deep, permanent scowls, and a thick silver and black beard hung down to his chest, dusted with faint white flecks of dried ash. He sat with his arms crossed over his chest, his gaze sweeping over the 90-odd nervous applicants with the absolute, unyielding coldness of a warden inspecting a fresh batch of convicts. "Look at him," Fatty Chen whispered out of the corner of his mouth, his round shoulder nudging Xiao-Ye as they found 2 adjacent tables near the drafty back corner of the pavilion. "That's Elder Mo-Ching. They call him the Iron-Faced Cauldron. My sources in the logistics department say he hasn't smiled since the Great Xia dynasty's last monetary reform. If you drop a leaf on his floor, he'll make you scrub the furnace flues for a month." "Good," Xiao-Ye murmured back, settling his straw hat on the corner of the iron table. "A strict supervisor means he values order. If I follow the instructions perfectly to the letter, no more, no less, he'll leave me alone to do my work. That's the dream." "Silence." Elder Mo-Ching's voice didn't boom, but it possessed a strange, resonant vibration that echoed off the stone walls, causing the brass mortars on the tables to ring in unison. The entire room of applicants instantly stiffened, several dropping their stirring rods in sheer panic. Every year, hundreds of foolish youths crawl up this mountain thinking that the path of alchemy is an easy shortcut to immortality, Mo-Ching spoke, his sharp, dark eyes boring into the crowd. They think they can sit safely behind a furnace, avoid the blood of the battlefield, and grow wealthy on the sweat of martial cultivators. Let me correct your delusion. A sloppy swordsman loses a limb, a sloppy alchemist vaporizes an entire courtyard. If you lack precision, you are not an asset. You are a localized natural disaster. He gestured broadly to the trays on the tables. The test consists of 2 phases, Mo-Ching continued. Phase 1, herb identification and purity separation. You have before you 3 common regional plants that have been deliberately exposed to environmental impurities. You will identify them, list their primary elemental affinity, and extract their core essence using only the tools provided. Phase 2, fire stability. You will ignite the copper crucible using your own latent wood-fire chi, and maintain a perfectly uniform temperature for the duration of a single incense stick. If your flame flickers, you fail. If your flame changes color, you fail. If you burn your table, you will pay for the iron. He waved his thick sleeve, and a thick stick of purple incense resting on the dais ignited with a tiny spark. "Begin." The room erupted into a flurry of frantic activity. All around Xiao-Ye, applicants began furiously grabbing the dried leaves from their trays, sniffing them, crushing them against their palms, and frantically scribbling on the small sheets of parchment provided. Xiao-Ye, true to his nature, didn't move for the first 3 minutes. He simply stood there, his hands tucked into his canvas sleeves, looking down at the 3 withered bundles in his wooden tray with a lazy, half-lidded gaze. Through his 100 herb recognition technique, the 3 unidentified plants practically stood out like neon signs with full technical readouts floating above them. Target 1, withered sundrop clover. Element, fire. Contamination, high covered in surface soot to mask its golden veins. Target 2, winterbone root. Element, yin water. Contamination, medium, soaked in cheap vinegar to mimic the smell of toxic nightshade. Target 3, common earth core tendril. Element, earth. Contamination, low. Classic trap, Xiao-Ye thought, a small, invisible smirk playing on his lips. The old man soaked the winterbone root in vinegar so people would mistake it for nightshade and list it as a poison element plant. If I list it as poison, I look like a regular idiot. If I list it with 100% perfect chemical breakdowns, I look like a hidden genius master. I need to land right in the comfortable middle, a solid C-. He picked up the wooden stylus and began writing on his parchment in a deliberately messy, peasant-like script. He identified the 3 plants correctly, since failing entirely meant getting kicked out. But he left out any advanced spiritual properties, writing only the bare minimum required to pass. Next came the extraction. The other applicants were using their brass pestles to violently mash the herbs into a sticky paste, hoping to squeeze out a few drops of greenish juice. Xiao-Ye looked at the brute force methods around him and shook his head. True extraction wasn't about crushing. It was about breaking the cellular fibers along their natural spiritual fault lines. Using only his thumb and forefinger, Xiao-Ye grabbed the sun-drop clover. He didn't use the heavy mortar. Instead, he applied a microscopic pinch of his newly acquired body, tempering strength directly to the base of the stem, snapping it at a precise 45-degree angle, the exact point where the plant's natural fire veins intersected. Drip, drip, drip. Without even needing to crush the leaves, a stream of thick, pure, amber-colored sap naturally drained from the broken stem directly into his small ceramic vial. It was completely free of the dark soot covering the exterior of the leaves. On his left, Fatty Chen was sweating profusely, using his massive body weight to lean on his pestle like a man churning butter. He looked over at Xiao-Ye's neat, effortless vial of amber sap and his jaw dropped. "Hey, how did you do that?" he whispered hoarsely. "My paste looks like swamp mud." "Stop crushing the veins, fat man," Xiao-Ye muttered quietly, keeping his eyes on his own tray. "You're locking the juice inside the bruised fiber. Pinch the base and let gravity do the work." Fatty Chen's eyes lit up. He immediately abandoned his pestle, grabbed his second herb, and mimicked Xiao-Ye's pinching motion. With a soft pop, a stream of clear liquid ran into his vial. Fatty Chen let out a silent, triumphant gasp, looking at Xiao-Ye as if the village youth were a god descended from the heavens. Up on the dais, Elder Mo Qing's gaze swept across the room. His eyes paused briefly on the back corner. He had noticed Xiao-Ye's weirdly effortless extraction method. The boy didn't seem to be using any grand spiritual energy, but his movements were incredibly efficient, the hallmark of a person who had spent years handling herbs. Interesting, Mo Qing thought, his scowl deepening slightly. An ordinary village boy with an oddly steady hand. Let's see how he handles the flame. Phase 1 concluded, Mo Qing announced as the first notch of the incense stick burned away. Seal your vials. Prepare your crucibles for Phase 2. Xiao-Ye placed his neat, perfectly separated vials at the top of his table. He then drew the small copper oil crucible toward him. This was the dangerous part. He had to ignite the oil using his internal pure heart fire seed. But there was a massive problem. His fire seed was a refined, highly concentrated spiritual flame, and he possessed the 7-syllable flame compression technique. If he unleashed even a fraction of its true power, the copper crucible would probably melt into a puddle of glowing slag within 3 seconds, and Elder Mo Qing would instantly know he was harboring a high-tier cultivation legacy. I need to sandbag this as hard as humanly possible, Xiao-Ye thought, his mind racing as he extended his hand toward the crucible. The system said the flame compression technique can increase temperature without increasing qi consumption. I need to do the exact opposite. I need to decompress the flame, make it sloppy, make it look like a weak, sputtering, medium-grade mortal fire. He closed his eyes, focusing on the brilliant cerulean spark near his heart. He pulled a thread of the fire down his arm, but as it reached his palm, he actively fought to loosen his control. He forced the energy to scatter, breaking the elegant, tightly bound structure of the technique into a messy, uncoordinated wave. He snapped his fingers over the crucible. Puff! A weak, flickering, sickly-looking pale orange flame popped into existence over the oil. It didn't have the beautiful, deep blue luster of the pure heart fire. It looked like a sad, dying candle flame catching a draft from an open window. It sputtered, popped, and sent up a tiny, pathetic wisp of black soot. Perfect, Xiao-Ye thought, keeping his expression neutral despite the intense mental strain of deliberately forcing his high-quality fire to look like garbage. It looks weak, it looks unstable, and it's barely putting out any heat. A flawless C- performance. All around the room, grand displays of fire were breaking out. Several wealthy town youths with upper-medium spirit roots were unleashing vibrant, roaring red flames that caused the air above their tables to shimmer with intense heat. They looked toward the front, proudly trying to catch Elder Mo Qing's approval. But Mo Qing wasn't looking at the roaring fires. His eyes were narrowed, fixed directly on the back corner of the room. To the other applicants, Xiao-Ye's flame looked like trash. But to an earth alchemist like Mo Qing, something felt incredibly wrong about that tiny, flickering orange spark. Mo Qing leaned forward, his divine sense subtly spreading across the room like an invisible mist. When his sense passed over Xiao-Ye's table, he expected to feel the boy's chi fluctuating and straining to keep the weak fire alive. Instead, he felt an absolute, terrifying wall of stillness. Xiao-Ye's internal spiritual meridians weren't shaking at all. In fact, the boy's heart rate was perfectly steady, his breathing was slow and rhythmic, and the core energy within his chest was as solid as a mountain granite boulder. He wasn't struggling to keep a weak flame alive. He was actively, intentionally strangling a much larger power, forcing it to sit inside that tiny, pathetic orange shell. He's hiding his depth. Mo Qing's old heart gave a sudden, violent thud against his ribs. A 15-year-old kid from a peripheral village is actively sandbagging my entrance exam, and his control is so absolute that if I hadn't used my personal divine sense, even my outer elders wouldn't have noticed the anomaly. Mo Qing looked down at the parchment where Xiao-Ye's messy, mediocre answers were written. He looked at the perfectly clean, amber sap in the vial. Then he looked at the boy's vacant, lazy expression as he stood there, pretending to sweat from the exertion of holding a candle-sized flame. A slow, terrifyingly sharp glint appeared deep within Elder Mo Qing's dark eyes. "You want to hide in the back rooms and play the lazy fool, do you, brat?" Mo Qing thought, a grim, rare smile threatening to break through his silver beard. "Not in my hall. If you have the control to fool my outer elders, then you have the control to refine my personal furnace." Ding! The incense stick finally burned down to its brass base. "Extinguish your flames," Mo Qing commanded, standing up from his slate dais. The entire room let out a collective, massive sigh of relief, many applicants collapsing onto their stools in sheer exhaustion. Xiao-Ye immediately cut off the thread of qi, letting his pathetic orange flame vanish with a soft PFF. He wiped a fake bead of sweat from his forehead, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh of relief. "Man, that was close. I thought my fire was going to go out for a second." Fatty Chen, whose flame had been a chaotic, sputtering green mess, patted Xiao-Ye on the back. "We did it, brother. We survived. With your tips on the herbs and my raw, unadulterated charisma, we're practically official disciples already." "Yeah," Xiao-Ye smiled, grabbing his straw hat and preparing to slip out with the rest of the crowd, while the outer assistants gathered the test papers. "Let's go find the dining hall. I heard they give free rice to the new apprentices." Before he could take a single step toward the exit, a tall, imposing shadow fell over his iron table. Xiao-Ye froze. Standing right in front of him, with his arms tucked into his ash-gray sleeves, was Elder Mo Qing. The old man was staring down at Xiao-Ye with an expression that made the hairs on the back of the boy's neck stand straight up. "Xiao-Ye, from Green Cloud Village," Mo Qing read from the messy parchment, his voice low, gravelly, and carrying a terrifying undertone of pure amusement. "Yes, Elder," Xiao-Ye said, quickly putting on his best dim-witted peasant smile. Did I fail? My fire was pretty weak, I know. I'm really sorry if I wasted your oil." "You passed," Mo Qing interrupted coldly, reaching down to grab Xiao-Ye's vial of perfectly separated amber sap. He held it up to the light, a sinister, knowing glint in his eyes. "In fact, your luck is so peculiar that the ordinary apprentice quarters would be a waste of your talents. Starting tomorrow, you will report directly to my personal pavilion as my primary furnace attendant." Xiao-Ye's jaw dropped. His perfect plan of landing a quiet, unbothered, low-level desk job in the corner of the herb garden was instantly shattered into a million glorious pieces. "Wait, Elder," Xiao-Ye panicked, his lazy composure entirely breaking. "I'm just a medium-grade root. Hanbei or those town geniuses up front would be way better." "My decision is final, furnace boy," Mo Qing sneered, turning his back and walking away with a sweeping flourish of his robes. Don't be late tomorrow, I don't like my fire cold. Xiao-Ye stood frozen in the drafty pavilion, staring at the old man's retreating back as Fatty Chen let out a low, whistling sound of pure awe next to him. Wow, brother Xiao, Fatty Chen whispered, his small eyes gleaming with immediate financial dollar signs. Your casual failure just got you promoted to the Supreme Elder's personal circle. We're going to be rich. Xiao-Ye slowly let his head drop onto the hard iron table with a miserable, hollow groan. I just wanted a quiet life, he whimpered into the metal. Why does fame keep chasing me? Chapter 6, The Chamber of Cracks and the 10-Year Knot. The Supreme Elder's private research pavilion did not look like a place where miracles were made. Tucked away on a sheer, jagged cliffside behind the main structures of the Green Cloud Sect, the stone building looked more like an abandoned fortress that had survived a localized artillery bombardment. The heavy oak doors were deeply charred around the edges, and the granite walls were webbed with thousands of tiny, splintered fractures, cracks that had been hastily sealed with spiritual mortar. A thin, perpetual wisp of bitter violet smoke leaked from the iron-reinforced chimney, smelling faintly of overcooked sulfur and burnt cabbage. Xiao-Ye stood outside the threshold, holding his straw hat in one hand and a small wooden broom in the other. He stared at a large, fresh dent in the stone wall right next to the door handle, a dent that looked suspiciously like the impact mark of a flying cauldron lid. Great, Xiao-Ye muttered, his voice flat with profound regret. I haven't even clocked in for my first day, and I already feel like I need a hazard pay waiver. The old man isn't an alchemist, he's a demolitions expert. He pushed the heavy door open, Kriyak. The interior of the pavilion was vast, dark, and suffocatingly hot. The only source of illumination came from a massive, multi-tiered bronze furnace sitting in the dead center of the room. The furnace stood over 8 feet tall, shaped like a crouching three-legged toad with its mouth wide open, revealing a roaring pit of deep crimson fire. Shelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with thousands of glass jars, ceramic boxes, and preserved beast parts. But unlike a neat library, everything here was in utter chaos. Jars were mislabeled, dried roots were strewn carelessly across stone desks, and a thick layer of fine gray ash covered every single surface like winter snow. At the base of the giant toad furnace, surrounded by a chaotic fortress of crumpled parchment and discarded charcoal, sat Elder Mo Qing. The old man looked even more disheveled than he had during the entrance exam. His gray robes were thrown over his shoulders like a blanket, his silver and black beard was tied into a frantic knot to keep it out of the fire, and his face was completely smeared with black soot. He was furiously scribbling on a piece of slate with a stick of chalk, his eyes wild and bloodshot. You're late, furnace boy, Mo Qing grunted without looking up, his voice raspy from inhaling too much smoke. Xiao-Ye checked the window. The sun hadn't even fully cleared the mountain horizon. Elder, the morning bells just rang 3 minutes ago. Technically, I'm early. In my pavilion, if the fire is burning and you aren't here to stoke it, you're late, Mo Qing snapped, finally tossing the chalk aside and standing up. He wiped his ash-covered hands on his robes, turning his sharp, piercing gaze directly onto Xiao-Ye. Throw your broom in the corner. You won't be sweeping floors today. Xiao-Ye sighed internally, carefully placing his broom against the wall. Then, what are my duties, Elder? Mo Qing walked over to a small, isolated stone table near the back of the room. Atop the table sat a single, heavily stained copper tray containing 3 ingredients: a completely shriveled blood-red root that looked like a dried scorpion tail, a small vial of thick, luminescent blue fluid that hummed with a violent, erratic vibration, and a piece of coarse, gray bark that flaked into metallic dust at the slightest touch. Next to the tray lay a single sheet of ancient parchment, its edges so brittle they looked ready to turn to ash if a strong breeze hit them. For the past 10 years, I have been trying to refine a specific pill, Mo Qing said, his voice dropping into a low, heavy tone that carried a decade's worth of pure frustration. The Crimson Vein Marrow Cleansing Elixir. It is a grade 2 pill meant to assist core formation cultivators in purging the bone toxins accumulated from reckless breakthroughs. On paper, the recipe is simple. In reality, it is a nightmare. Xiao-Ye walked over, his eyes narrowing slightly as his 100 herb recognition technique automatically scanned the 3 items on the tray. Target 1, Scorched Scorpion Tail Ginseng. Element, Pure Fire Yin Poison. Target 2, Flash Flood Liquid. Element, Violent Water Lightning. Target 3, Iron Oak Scale Bark. Element, Earth Metal. Fire Poison, Violent Lightning Water, and Dense Metal Earth, Xiao-Ye thought, his data analyst brain immediately flagging the massive, flashing red errors in the structural logic. This isn't a recipe for a medicine pill. This is a recipe for a localized pipe bomb. Whoever wrote this pill scripture was either a lunatic or a saboteur. Every time the crimson scorpion-tail ginseng liquefies, Mo Qing explained, pacing back and forth with his hands clamped behind his back, its internal fire affinity expands exponentially. The moment it touches the flash flood liquid, the water and fire elements violently reject one another. I have adjusted the cauldron air pressure 300 times. I have changed the heating sequence. I have used 7 different types of charcoal, every single time. Boom. He stopped pacing, turning his intense, knowing gaze back onto Xiao-Ye. Yesterday, during the exam, I watched your flame control. Mo Qing narrowed his eyes into tiny, dangerous slits. You managed to hold a weak, pathetic orange flame perfectly steady while your internal meridians remained as solid as a mountain stone wall. You weren't struggling, you were compressing your fire. Don't deny it, brat. Xiao-Ye opened his mouth to put on his classic, clueless peasant boy act, but Mo Qing cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. Save your breath. I don't care where you got your inheritance, and I don't care what old master you're hiding from, Mo Qing sneered, pointing a thick finger at the giant-toed furnace. Your job today is simple. I'm going to initiate the refinement sequence. When the temperature inside the core reaches the critical threshold, you will take control of the external vents. You will use that weirdly stable, compressed fire of yours to create a localized microcooling pocket directly beneath the scorpion-tail liquid. If you balance the heat correctly, the water won't boil off and the pill won't explode. If you fail... Mo Qing pointed to the fresh dent in the granite wall next to the door. Well, the wall is soft enough to catch a flying body. Elder, Xiao-Ye said, his face turning an uncharacteristic shade of pale. This seems incredibly hazardous for a newly recruited apprentice. I don't even have an official uniform yet. If you survive the morning, I'll give you 2 uniforms, Mo Qing grunted, already walking toward the furnace and channeling a massive wave of crimson chi into the intake vents. To your station, boy, the sequence is starting. The giant bronze-toed furnace let out a deep, deafening roar as the internal crimson flames surged, turning the metal exterior from a dull brown to a vibrant, glowing orange-red. The temperature in the room instantly skyrocketed, causing the air to warp and distort with intense thermal currents. Xiao-Ye realized he had no choice. If he ran out the door, the old man would probably drag him back by his collar. If he stood here and did nothing, he'd get blasted out of the building by a volatile alchemical explosion. Fine, Xiao-Ye muttered, a sharp, cold glint finally replacing his lazy gaze as he stepped up to the secondary control wheel at the base of the furnace. If you want me to play software tester for your broken 10-year-old code, old man, then let's actually fix the bugs. He reached out his hands, gripping the iron levers of the furnace vents. Deep within his chest, the pure heart fire seed flared into life, its deep cerulean light pulsing gently in tandem with his steady heartbeat. Mo Qing threw the iron oak scale bark into the maw of the furnace first, letting the dense earth element create a stable, heat-resistant base layer at the bottom of the cauldron. Then, with a flick of his fingers, he sent the scorched scorpion-tail ginseng flying into the center of the flames. The ginseng is melting, Mo Qing shouted over the roaring of the fire. Its fire energy is expanding. Now, boy, give me the cooling pocket. Xiao-Ye didn't hesitate. He utilized the 7-syllable flame compression technique. But instead of using it to increase the heat, he inverted the structural runes to compress the pure heart fire seed's mild, soothing yin cooling properties. He snapped his fingers, sending a thin, invisible thread of pale blue energy through the bottom left vent of the furnace. The moment his compressed blue flame entered the chamber, it didn't clash with Mo Qing's roaring crimson fire. Instead, it formed a perfectly circular, microscopic ring of stable, cool air directly beneath the floating pool of liquefied red ginseng, acting exactly like a thermal insulator. Inside the furnace, the violent, erratic fire affinity of the root was instantly contained, locked inside a neat, invisible cage of compressed cold energy. Mo Qing's eyes widened to the size of saucers. He was monitoring the internal temperature with his divine sense, expecting a massive, erratic spike. Instead, he felt the internal graph completely flatten into a perfectly straight, beautiful line. It's stable, Mo Qing whispered, his voice trembling in utter disbelief. For 10 years, this specific moment had always resulted in a violent shuddering of the cauldron. Today, the furnace was as quiet as a sleeping child. Don't celebrate yet, old man, Xiao-Ye grunted, his fingers tightening around the iron levers as his sweat began to drop onto the hot floor tiles. Throw the water liquid in. The insulation ring can only hold for 20 more seconds before your main fire breaches the layer. Mo Qing snapped out of his daze. With a frantic, trembling hand, he grabbed the vial of flash flood liquid and hurled it into the core. The luminescent blue fluid hit the floating pool of red ginseng. There was no explosion. There was no violent rejection. Because of the perfectly maintained micro-cooling pocket Xiao-Ye had generated, the violent water element didn't flash boil into volatile steam. It slid smoothly over the surface of the fire root, its cooling properties naturally blending with the plant's inner essence, guided by the precise thermal boundaries of the blue insulation ring. The thick, chaotic smoke inside the furnace suddenly changed from a toxic violet to a beautiful, translucent pastel pink. A rich, sweet, medicinal fragrance began to waft from the exhaust vents, smelling of fresh pine and clean mountain rain. The condensation phase. Mo Qing stood frozen, his jaw completely slack as he watched the pink smoke begin to swirl into 3 neat, round shapes inside the core cauldron. It's actually condensing. After 10 years, it's finally forming a pill. Xiao-Ye kept his eyes locked on the vents, his analytical mind tracking the final cooling sequence down to the millisecond. 5, 4, 3, 2. Cut the heat, Xiao-Ye shouted. Mo Qing instinctively slammed his hands down, severing his crimson chi transmission. Simultaneously, Xiao-Ye snapped his fingers, pulling back his thread of blue fire. Clang! A heavy internal mechanism inside the toad furnace dropped, and 3 perfectly formed, marble-sized crimson spheres rolled out of the retrieval chute, settling neatly onto the iron tray at the bottom. The pills were a deep, rich burgundy color, etched with fine, microscopic silver veins that pulsed with a gentle, stable light. The room went completely, utterly silent. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic panting of the old elder and the soft crackle of dying charcoal. Mo Qing slowly walked over to the retrieval tray. His hands were shaking so violently that he almost dropped his wooden tongs as he picked up one of the fresh pills. He held it up to his bloodshot eyes, his divine sense probing the internal structure with frantic intensity. Purity. 80%, Mo Qing whispered, a single fat tear cutting a clean line through the black soot on his wrinkled cheek. Top quality grade 2, no toxins, no structural instability, 10 years. 10 years of my life, solved by a brat with an attic toy and a bucket of cold fire. He slowly turned his head toward Xiao-Ye. Xiao-Ye was already leaning against the stone wall, completely drained from the intense mental calculation required to invert a grade 3 spiritual art on his first try. He wiped his brow with his sleeve, letting out a long, pathetic groan. Can I go back to sweeping the floors now, elder? Xiao-Ye whimpered. My arms feel like lead. Mo Qing didn't answer immediately. He stared at the village youth, his old eyes burning with a mixture of profound awe, terrifying pride, and an absolute, unshakable determination to never let this boy leave his sight. Floor sweeping, Mo Qing let out a loud, booming laugh that caused the fractured granite walls of the pavilion to rattle dangerously. Brat, you just helped me solve the greatest bottleneck of my alchemical career. Starting tomorrow, you aren't an apprentice. You are my official personal furnace partner. We have 12 more unstable ancient recipes in the cabinet that I've been wanting to test since the last century. Xiao-Ye stared at the old man's maniacal, soot-stained face, then looked down at his own trembling hands. His perfect, beautiful plan of landing a quiet, lazy, low-level slacker job in the forgotten corners of the sect had not just failed. It had suffered a total, catastrophic structural collapse. System, Xiao-Ye thought miserably in his mind, his soul letting out a silent scream. Can I exchange my high-medium spirit root back for a trash root? I think I accidentally picked the wrong career path. Ding, system response. Negative. The path of the eternal alchemy emperor has no refund policy. The host is advised to get a good night's rest and prepare for tomorrow's manufacturing sprint. Chapter 7. The Charcoal Waste and the Underground Ledger. The trash bins outside Elder Mo Qing's private pavilion were not filled with ordinary garbage. While a normal mortal household discarded potato peelings and torn rags, a Supreme Alchemist's waste disposal unit consisted of a massive, reinforced iron vat filled with charcoal slag, fractured ceramic crucible shards, and failed testers. Pills that possessed minor structural flaws, imperfect color distributions, or a purity rating that fell just short of the Elder's borderline maniacal standards. Xiao-Ye stood over the iron vat, a wooden shovel in his hands and his trusty straw hat pulled low against the midday sun. His task for the afternoon was simple: empty the slag, scrub the soot from the vat walls, and haul the waste down to the lower mountain ravines where the sect buried its alchemical debris. 80% purity, Xiao-Ye muttered to himself, leaning on his shovel and staring at a handful of rejected marble-sized burgundy spheres he had just fished out of the black charcoal dust. The old man called these miserable failures because they had a tiny silver streak on the northern hemisphere instead of being perfectly uniform. Back in the village, a single one of these would buy a whole farm. Here, it's literally mixed in with the furnace ash. He was about to toss the rejected pills back into the slag pile when a large, fleshy hand suddenly shot out from the shadow of a nearby pine tree, clamping down over his wrist with the speed of a striking viper. "Don't throw those away. Are you insane? That's like throwing raw gold into a pig trough." Xiao-Ye didn't even jolt. He simply turned his head, his lazy gaze landing on the round, sweat-streaked face of Fatty Chen. The fat merchant had somehow managed to upgrade his wardrobe since yesterday. He was now wearing the official white cotton robe of a logistics department apprentice, but he had already modified it, sewing an illegal row of hidden, velvet-lined pockets along the interior of his wide sleeves. His small, bead-like eyes were staring at the burgundy pills in Xiao-Ye's hand, with an intensity that bordered on religious devotion. "Fatty," Xiao-Ye sighed, pulling his wrist back and dropping the shovel. "What are you doing up here? This is the Supreme Elder's restricted zone. If Mo Qing catches you sniffing around his trash, he'll turn you into a human charcoal filter." "The rewards justify the operational risks, Brother Xiao," Fatty Chen wheezed, rapidly scanning the deserted cliffside path before dragging Xiao-Ye behind the thick trunk of the pine tree. "Do you have any idea what's happening down in the outer disciple barracks right now? The quarterly martial trial is in 2 weeks. Half the rich town kids from the Chi Gathering Division have destroyed their own meridians from over-medicating, trying to force a breakthrough. Their bones are swimming in pill toxins." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping into an urgent, rapid-fire whisper. "The sect infirmary is charging 50 low-grade spirit stones for a basic standard-grade cleansing salve that takes 3 months to work. But these Crimson Vein marrow-cleansing pills, even as failures, their internal purity is over 75%. It's an instant purge. It's a miracle elixir for anyone desperate enough to pay." Xiao-Ye rubbed his chin, his data-driven mind immediately calculating the legal ramifications. Mo Qing threw them away. Technically, they're abandoned property. But running an unapproved medical distribution ring inside a cultivation sect violates at least 6 major bylaws I read on the registration board. "It's not a distribution ring, Xiao-Ye. It's a highly targeted, exclusive underground liquidity event," Fatty Chen grinned, his face twisting into a mask of pure financial genius. "An auction, tonight midnight at the abandoned laundry barracks near the lower marshes. I've already sent out word to 40 of the wealthiest, most desperate outer disciples. The starting bid for a single tester is 40 spirit stones. We have 6 pills here. You do the math." Xiao-Ye looked at the 6 burgundy spheres in his palm. 240 spirit stones minimum. That was enough to buy a mid-grade spiritual cauldron from the city markets, completely independent of the sect's supply chain. It meant freedom. It meant being able to experiment with his system rewards without Mo Qing breathing down his neck. 50-50, Xiao-Ye said, his eyes narrowing into a sharp, practical line. "But there's a catch. If things go sideways, if some arrogant young master tries to take the pills by force without paying, I am not fighting them with a sword. I am a peaceful slacker." "That's exactly why you're coming with me as my financial muscle." Fatty Chen clapped his hands together, practically bouncing on his heels. You don't need a sword, brother Xiao. You're the personal attendant of the iron-faced cauldron. You just stand behind my desk, look mysterious, and if anyone tries to cheat us, you threat to tell Mo Qing that they're sabotaging his private research. The old man's name alone is enough to make a core disciple wet themselves. Using a Supreme Elder's terrifying reputation as a corporate extortion shield, Xiao-Ye muttered, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across his face. Fatty, you truly have no shame. I accept the terms. Midnight at the lower marshes was dark, damp, and thick with the croaking of spiritual bullfrogs. The abandoned laundry barracks was a massive, rotting wooden structure with a collapsed roof that let the pale moonlight stream directly onto the damp floorboards. Despite the ungodly hour and the sketchy location, the interior of the room was packed. Nearly 40 outer disciples, all wearing the fine silk undershirts of wealthy families beneath their sect robes, were gathered in a tight, anxious huddle. Many of them were pale, their hands trembling slightly from the volatile bone toxins destroying their internal chi networks. At the front of the room, sitting behind an old wooden wash crate flipped on its side, was Fatty Chen. He had laid out a clean piece of black felt atop the crate, and resting in the center were the 6 burgundy pills glowing faintly under the moonlight. Standing directly behind him, with his arms tucked into his ash-gray sleeves, and his straw hat pulled down so far his eyes were completely invisible, was Xiao-Ye. He looked less like an apprentice alchemist, and more like a silent, terrifying assassin guarding a royal vault. "Welcome, elite colleagues. Welcome to the midnight clearance," Fatty Chen spoke, his voice low but carrying an immense magnetic weight. "No names will be recorded, no ledgers will be kept. You see before you the apex of modern alchemical purification, discarded directly from the personal crucible of the Supreme Elder himself. A single pill will clear your marrow, reset your meridians, and give you a 70% higher survival rate in the upcoming trials." The crowd surged forward, their eyes burning with manic desperation. 40 spirit stones, a voice shouted from the back. "I'll take the first one for 40. 45, another youth pushed forward, waving a leather pouch that clinked with the heavy sound of spiritual currency. "My legs are turning black from chi stagnation, 50 stones. 55. The bidding rose with the speed of an unchecked forest fire. Fatty Chen's hands were a blur as he slammed his wooden gavel against the wash grate, recording the bids in his head with the precision of a master abacus. The first 3 pills vanished into the crowd within 10 minutes, yielding a staggering 165 low-grade spirit stones. Just as Fatty Chen was about to open the bidding for the 4th pill, the heavy wooden doors of the laundry barracks were violently kicked off their rusty hinges. Bang! The sudden explosion of splinters caused the crowd of outer disciples to scream, scattering toward the corners of the room like startled mice. Walking through the dust clouds was a tall, lean youth with an incredibly sharp, aristocratic face. He was wearing the premium midnight blue robe of a top-tier outer disciple, and a long, silver-hilted longsword hung from his sash. His aura was heavy, vibrant, and crackling with the unmistakable energy of the 5th layer of the Qi-gathering realm. This was Zhao Feng, the arrogant, widely feared bully of the outer barracks division. Well, what do we have here?" Zhao Feng sneered, his hand resting casually on the pommel of his sword as his cold eyes swept over the room, landing directly on the black felt mat. "An illegal market running right under my nose, and look at what you're selling. Supreme-grade cleansing pills. It's a shame that all illegal contraband within the lower barracks must be confiscated by the enforcement squad, which happens to be me." Fatty Chen's brilliant smile didn't fade, but his small eyes narrowed into tiny, dangerous slits. "Brother Zhao Feng, the enforcement squad requires a written warrant from the Hall of Justice to seize goods. You're alone, it's midnight, and your boots are covered in mud. This looks less like enforcement and more like armed robbery." "Call it what you want, fat man," Zhao Feng hissed, his sword clearing its scabbard with a sharp, terrifying sheathing. The silver steel caught the moonlight, radiating a chilly wave of sword chi that caused the old floorboards to crack. "I am taking those remaining 3 pills. If you or your little peasant shadow behind you say a single word, I'll slice your storage rings right off your fingers and report you for smuggling anyway." The crowd of disciples held their breath. Nobody dared to cross Zhao Feng. He was predicted to become an inner disciple within the month, and his family owned 3 major iron mines in the Great Xia borders. Fatty Chen subtly shifted his weight, his fingers creeping toward a small smoke bomb talisman hidden in his cuff. He was preparing to dump the table and run. But before he could trigger the talisman, a slow, incredibly dry yawn resonated from behind him. Xiao-Ye slowly tilted his straw hat up with his index finger, revealing a face that was completely, terrifyingly calm. He didn't look at Zhao Feng's flashing sword. He didn't look at the crackling sword chi. He simply reached into his sleeve, pulled out a small piece of charcoal waste from his morning duties, and began tossing it up and down in his palm like a casual pebble. "Zhao Feng," Xiao-Ye said, his voice quiet, lazy, and echoing clearly through the silent barracks. "Before you take those pills, you should probably take a close look at the silver inscriptions etched into the resin." Zhao Feng paused, his eyes darting to the burgundy spheres. "What about them?" "Those inscriptions are a localized tracking array," Xiao-Ye lied smoothly, his expression so completely blank and unbothered that it looked like he was reading a weather report. "Elder Mo Qing doesn't throw things away because he's sloppy. He throws them away to see who is stupid enough to steal them from his trash. Right now, as we speak, the old man is sitting in his pavilion, monitoring the spiritual vibrations of those 3 pills. If those pills leave this room inside your pockets, his divine sense will lock onto your coordinates within 4 seconds. The mention of Elder Mo Qing's name caused Zhao Feng's sword hand to give a visible, violent twitch. "You're bluffing," Zhao Feng growled, though a thin bead of cold sweat instantly broke out along his aristocratic temple. "You're just a common furnace boy. You don't know anything about tracking arrays." "I don't," Xiao-Ye agreed, letting out another small yawn. "But I'm the guy who has to carry his private ledger back and forth to the Hall of Justice every Tuesday. If you want to test whether the iron-faced cauldron's personal tracking array works, go ahead and touch the felt. I'll make sure to write 'died of total body disintegration' next to your name in the report tomorrow morning. It'll save the elders a lot of paperwork." Xiao-Ye took a step forward, leaning his hands casually on the edge of the wash grate. He looked directly into Zhao Feng's eyes, his high-medium wood-fire roots subtly flaring just enough to send a tiny, harmless pulse of pure, unblemished, pure-heart fire warmth through the wood. To an ordinary person, it was just heat. But to a chi-gathering cultivator like Zhao Feng, the purity of that tiny heat pulse felt intensely, terrifyingly refined. The unmistakable signature of a person who spent 24 hours a day breathing the same air as a supreme alchemist. Zhao Feng's breath hitched in his throat. His mind raced frantically. The boy is too calm. A normal peasant would be begging for mercy at the sight of a sword. If he's telling the truth, if Mo Qing is monitoring this, I'm dead. My family's iron minds won't save me from a supreme elder's rage. With a shaky, furious breath, Zhao Feng slammed his longsword back into its scabbard with a loud clack. This isn't over, you trash smugglers," Zhao Feng shouted, trying desperately to salvage his shattered dignity as he backed toward the broken doorway. "The quarterly trial is coming. I'll watch every single one of you fail. Enjoy your garbage pills while you can." He turned on his heel and fled into the misty marshes, his boots splashing frantically through the mud until his shadow vanished entirely into the dark night. The barracks remained silent for 3 seconds before the entire crowd of outer disciples let out a massive, roaring cheer. Brother Xiao-Ye is invincible. He stared down a 5th-layer sword cultivator with a piece of charcoal. The tracking array story was genius. Xiao-Ye didn't join the celebration. He immediately reached down, grabbed 3 pouches of spirit stones from the desk, and stuffed them into his canvas sleeves. "Fatty, pack the remaining pills. The tracking story was a total lie, but if Zhao Feng runs into a real guard on his way back, the enforcement squad might actually show up. We have exactly 2 minutes to clear out." On it, on it." Fatty Chen was already scooping the felt mat into his golden-sleeved robes, his face split into a grin so wide it looked like it was going to tear his cheeks. 270 low-grade spirit stones. Brother Zio, you aren't a slacker. You're a financial god." The 2 boys slipped out through the back window of the laundry barracks, blending effortlessly into the midnight fog as they headed back up the mountain. Xiao-Ye pulled his straw hat back over his eyes, feeling the heavy, comfortable weight of 90 spirit stones clinking against his ribs. His perfect plan of an ordinary, unbothered sect life was definitely gone. But as he looked down at his new financial reserves, he had to admit that this illegal entrepreneurship gig had some seriously excellent corporate benefits. Chapter 8, The Tampered Ledger and the Meat Grinder. The central plaza of the outer barracks was a hornet's nest of nervous adrenaline. A massive slate monolith, towering 30 feet high, had been driven into the stone tiles. Etched onto its dark surface by active threads of martial chi were the official brackets for the upcoming quarterly trial. For outer disciples, this trial was everything. Survive your bracket, and you earned cultivation resources, prestige, and a potential ticket out of the muddy lower barracks. Fail miserably, and you were relegated to minor menial labor for the next season. Xiao-Ye stood at the absolute fringe of the clamoring crowd, safely tucked behind a pillar, munching on a dried sweet potato he had pilfered from the Alchemy Hall's break room. He had only walked down here because Fatty Chen had insisted on checking the logistical betting lines for the tournament. "Let's see here," Fatty Chen muttered, running a chubby, ink-stained finger down a portable parchment copy of the roster. The Logistics Hall officially exempted all primary alchemy attendants from physical combat duties under Bylaw 14. You're totally in the clear, Brother Xiao. Your name shouldn't even be on the... Fatty Chen froze. The color rapidly drained from his round face, turning his skin the shade of spoiled tofu. "What?" Xiao-Ye asked lazily, swallowing his sweet potato. "Did the betting odds for the kitchen staff drop?" "Xiao-Ye," Fatty Chen's voice squeaked, his hand trembling as he pointed up at the massive slate monolith. "Look at bracket 4, the very bottom line." Xiao-Ye tilted his straw hat back and blinked. There, glowing in a cruel, vibrant crimson chi text, were the words: Match 12, Xiao-Ye Alchemy Apprentice V's, Ironbark Tigang Body Tempering 6th Layer. The surrounding outer disciples, who noticed the name, immediately began whispering and laughing. An alchemist against Tigang. Tigang is the guy who broke 3 sparring partners' ribs last week just by flexing his pectorals. Who did this kid offend? This isn't a match, it's a public execution. This is a clerical error, Xiao-Ye said, his analytical mind immediately identifying the structural anomaly. Bylaw 14 is hard-coded into the sect's automated ledger system. A human had to manually overwrite the script using an administrative authorization token. It wasn't an error, a cold, mocking voice sneered from the crowd. Walking through the parting disciples was Zhao Feng. He no longer looked panicked or sweaty like he had in the midnight marshes. He was wearing a pristine, high-grade silk robe, and a smug, venomous grin was plastered across his aristocratic face. Behind him stood 2 burly enforcers, their arms crossed. "Zhao Feng," Fatty Chen hissed, stepping in front of Xiao-Ye. "You tampered with the Grand Slate Ledger. That's an automatic 5-year demotion if the discipline elders find out." "Find out? Who's going to tell them? A fat smuggler and a weak little furnace boy?" Zhao Feng laughed, leaning in close, his voice a low, vicious hiss. "My cousin is the senior clerk in the registration hall. A single administrative token was all it took to slide your name right into the meat grinder, Xiao-Ye. You think you can threaten me with Elder Mo Qing's name? Let's see if the iron faces care about a dead assistant whose bones have been turned into paste by Tigang." Zhao Feng patted the hilt of his silver sword, looking utterly triumphant. "The moment you step onto that public arena stage, you either fight and get pulverized, or you forfeit, which under sect law counts as cowardice, resulting in immediate expulsion. Either way, you're off my mountain. Enjoy your last 2 weeks of breathing." With a sweeping turn of his blue robes, Zhao Feng strode away, his laughter echoing across the plaza. Fatty Chen turned to Xiao-Ye, his small eyes frantic. "Brother Xiao, this is bad. Tigang isn't a normal cultivator. He practices the Ironskin Vajra art. He literally eats river gravel to strengthen his stomach lining. He's at the 6th layer of body tempering. Your 2nd layer strength won't even scratch his paint." Xiao-Ye didn't look panicked. He didn't look angry. He just looked incredibly, profoundly annoyed. 2 weeks, Xiao-Ye murmured, tossing the remaining bit of sweet potato into his mouth. "He ruined my afternoon nap, forced me to walk all the way down this mountain, and now he's trying to disrupt my career path. I hate overachieving, but I hate being forced out of a comfortable job even more." He turned back toward the path leading to the Supreme Elder's Pavilion. "Where are you going?" Fatty Chen called out. "Are we going to report him?" "No," Xiao-Ye said, waving his hand lazily without turning around. "Reporting takes too much paperwork, and the elders are slow. I'm going back to the furnace. It's time to cook something that turns an iron-eating meathead into a very soft piece of dough. Back in the suffocating heat of the private research pavilion, Elder Mo Ching was nowhere to be seen, likely off in the inner valleys gathering more volatile herbs. The giant toad furnace sat quiet, its embers glowing a faint, sleepy orange. Xiao-Ye walked directly to his private stone workbench, his hands flying through his storage bag. He pulled out the 90 low-grade spirit stones he had earned from the midnight auction. System, Xiao-Ye thought firmly in his mind. Open the system exchange shop, filter by defensive auxiliary arrays and high-impact kinetic dampening formulas. Ding! System shop interface initialized, presenting Slacker-compatible options within current budget. A holographic menu, only visible to Xiao-Ye, flickered to life. Option 1, 9 Dragon Shield Talisman, Grade 2, cost 80 Spirit Stones. Option 2, Tyrant Elephant Body Tempering Pill Recipe, Grade 1, cost 50 Spirit Stones. Option 3, Kinetic Inversion Paste Formula Special Grade 1 Auxiliary Compound, cost 60 Spirit Stones. Xiao-Ye's eyes locked onto Option 3. He pulled up the technical description. Kinetic Inversion Paste, a temporary topical ointment. When applied to the skin, it utilizes wood-fire spiritual properties to absorb external kinetic impact, punches, bludgeoning, and convert 50% of the force into localized thermal energy, which is then harmlessly vented through the skin as sweat. Effect duration, 15 minutes. Note, requires precise fire compression during refinement to activate the absorption cells. Perfect, Xiao-Ye's eyes gleamed with a rare, highly dangerous spark of pure pragmatism. Taigang wants to use raw, physical brute force. He wants to hit me like a hammer. This paste turns me into a giant sponge that converts his kinetic hammer into a hot bath. It's lazy, it requires zero active sword movement from me, and he'll literally defeat himself by exhausting his own muscles. He immediately clicked exchange. Ding, 60 spirit stones deducted. Kinetic Inversion Paste Formula downloaded directly to host's memory banks. A massive wave of alchemical data flooded Xiao-Ye's brain, outlining the exact molecular breakdown of common regional herbs needed to create the paste, mostly low-grade iron grass, marrow-soothing mint, and standard fire vein seeds. All things he could easily pull from Mo Ching's discarded waste bins without anyone noticing. Xiao-Ye walked over to the secondary furnace, his lazy posture entirely vanishing. He cracked his knuckles, his expression tightening into the cold, calculation-heavy demeanor of a master software programmer fixing a critical network vulnerability. Deep within his chest, the pure heart fire seed flared, its brilliant cerulean light rushing down his arms. 2 weeks, Xiao-Ye muttered, tossing the iron grass into his small mortar. Zhao Feng, you wanted a public show. I'm going to give you a performance so boring you'll wish you never bought that ledger.